Today we're going to be trapping in a residential pond for snapping turtles where they've gotten a little bit too thick. And I'm going to be taking you along for one of our trap checks. But before we get into it, if you don't mind, please hit that like and subscribe button so that you can stay informed on when our next critter adventure is going to be. And if there's a wildlife related question that you have not seen me touch on yet, leave it in the comments below and I just might make a video on it. But let's go ahead and dive into my trap check. Jacob went ahead and put on his hip boots so that he could get in the water and go ahead and see what we have in the trap. This one in particular is pretty large and designed specifically to trap snapping turtles. Apparently this big dude just could not resist the smell of that meat in the bait box. And the next step is going to be dragging this trap up on the bank and teaching Jacob how to safely remove a snapping turtle, at least while keeping all your fingers intact. Now from this angle it doesn't look like it, but the camera is also on the hill. But this bank is pretty steep, and with all the weeds, dragging this giant trap out of the water was no small feat. Now to give you a better idea of how this trap works, it's essentially a giant minnow trap for snapping turtles where they go in the funnel to get to the bait and just can't figure out how to get out. And with the trap finally on dry land, let's go ahead and take a closer look at our shelled friend here. This curious guy is a common snapping turtle, and I'm not just saying that because they're a common turtle to find, that's actually their common name. Common snapping turtles are pretty easy to identify, but they're even easier to identify here because we don't have the alligator snapping turtle to compare them with. Now being a snapping turtle, they obviously have really strong jaws and a really sharp beak. And right now our current objective is to keep all body parts out of that mouth. Jacob here is working with me for the summer, and this is the first snapping turtle that he's ever had to catch. So it's okay for us to cut him a little bit of slack here. His objective is to try to grab the snapping turtle by the back of the shell and not his tail so that we don't injure his spine in the process. By grabbing the turtle by the back of the carapace, it's much safer for the turtle and also helps keep Jacob's digits out of the bitey end. After a little bit of a run around, Jacob was finally able to get a good grip on the back of that shell. One additional thing that I like to do is once I get a hold of the back of that shell, I like to reach underneath the plastron, which is the bottom of the shell, and hold on to the belly. It still keeps my hands out of harm's way, but also adds a little bit more support for the turtle, making them easier to carry. This is much more important whenever you're dealing with like a 30-35 pound snapping turtle. Common snapping turtles get misidentified as alligator snapping turtles on a regular basis because of that spiky tail. But one big difference between the two is how much smoother the shell is on a common snapping turtle. If this had been an alligator snapping turtle, there would be much larger spikes on the scoots of the shell. These guys also don't get nearly as big as the alligator snapping turtle, which can get upwards of 200 pounds. But even though this was a smaller male, common snapping turtles can still get upwards of 30 to 40 pounds. Now as I was holding this guy, I noticed a bunch of movement on his head, and if you look closely, those are all leeches. These leeches can latch on to soft skin to get a meal from the turtle, but they also use the turtles to travel from one body of water to another, using them as a sort of public transportation system. Just a lot cooler and more prehistoric than the buses that we have. With this guy free from the trap, it's time to rebait it and get it back in the water to see if we can find any of his other friends hiding in the bottom of the pond. Thankfully, getting the trap into the water is a lot easier than getting it out of the water, especially since there's less turtles in there this time. When Jacob sets the trap back down, take note that he wants to make sure it's level and also that there is a big enough gap at the top that the turtles can lift their heads up and get a breath of air when they need to. We want to make sure there's no risk of anybody drowning inside of the trap. Now with the trap properly set, Jacob crawled back out of the pond and got his muddy boots off so that we could take this guy to another private pond where he's a little bit more welcome. And while he was obviously not pleased with the scenery change at first, he quickly took off into the pond once he realized he was back in the water where he feels much more comfortable.